Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hardware News Recap of the Week. In this one, we'll be talking about Intel's CPU naming officially changing now. We'll also be going over the RTX 4060 and its launch date and how that stacks up. AMD has a lot of announcements, including CPUs with more than 1 GB of cache at this point. They're in the Epyc line, but it's still pretty cool stuff to look at just from a technology standpoint, and lots of GPUs with hidden cables. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Lexar NM800 Pro Gen 4 SSD. The NM800 is a heavy-duty SSD with an included heatsink, thermal pad contact to the heatsink, and high transfer speeds across a Gen 4x4 NVMe interface. The Lexar NM800 Pro is available in 512GB, 1TB, and 2TB capacities, and Lexar notes that its included heat spreader, plus its choice of NAND, allows it to run at 7,500 megabytes per second sequential read and 6,500 megabytes per second sequential write at fastest. Learn more at the link in the description below. First one, after rumors about a month ago, Intel is confirming now that it is in fact changing its CPU naming. And this is a big deviation from its old Core I branding that it's had since Nehalem or thereabouts. So since about 2009, 2010, Intel is dropping the I signifier and just going with the number, kind of like how it dropped the nanometer suffix and just went with a number for its process technologies, which that one, there's some fair points to do that. In either case, it's a big shift, and so there's going to be some confusion with the next launch. This starts with Meteor Lake. The boxes look an awful lot like AMD Ryzen boxes at this point, and here's how the branding works. Intel's names include Core Ultra, Core, Evo Edition, vPro Enterprise, and vPro Essentials. At least those two are easier to understand. Core Ultra, Intel says, is for the, quote, advanced client offerings. We're assuming that's like the high-end enthusiast desktop parts, but they haven't 100% confirmed which SKUs get this yet. The Core processors without the Ultra, looking forward to this in reviews where, like with the 10 series, we have to say 1080 non-Ti, 1080 Ti. With AMD, you say the 7900 XTX or the 7900 XT non-second X. Now we're going to have the Intel Core Ultra and the Intel Core non-Ultra. They normally work in the negative because that's the only way to clarify rapidly. Anyway, the Intel Core processors without Ultra will be mainstream client, and then Intel also noted that its 3, 5, 7, and 9 tiers will drop the I prefix. So in other words, it's not going to be the Intel i3, it'll just be Intel 3. So now, as an example, and this is actually an example, we might have the Intel Core 3 14330. Good. Intel will be using the phrasing Evo Edition, adding now yet another completely unlinked brand name to the cluster for its Evo certified system, something that's already been announced and exists. And finally, it's introducing Intel vPro Enterprise and vPro Essentials for businesses. Intel's official blog post has a section to explain why this matters, and to just condense the 2 paragraphs for you, they basically say it matters because it matters. So the whole thing actually boils down to it doesn't matter, it's just naming, and it's not like it's just kind of a weird change. It strikes us as one of those, like, Intel's trying to reinvent itself, and this was the best way it could think of doing it. And I'm sure they will be spending millions of dollars to push this initiative across the board. So good. Everyone knows the names now, and there's really nothing else to talk about until the next CPU launches, and there's a lot of confusion, and nobody knows what to search for. Next one, NVIDIA's RTX 4060 gets a launch date. Speaking of companies that have changed branding in the past, GTX to RTX, NVIDIA was able to force it through. Maybe Intel can do the same. Anyway, the 4060. NVIDIA officially posted a tweet confirming the launch date. They say June 29th, and that's going to be 6 a.m. Pacific time, $300. The price is already known. It's $100 lower than the 4060 Ti. Maybe it's enough with the positioning to make it a much more interesting card. We'll have to see in testing. Honestly, the thing that gives the most hope for the 4060 was AMD's sheer panic before the 7600 launch, where they just dropped the price one day before it went out. Either way, it's $30 higher than the AMD RX 7600, the 4060 that is. and then $100 cheaper than the Ti. The 4060 will have 3072 CUDA cores and 8 gigabytes of DDR6 memory. That's running at 17 gigabits per second this time. The already launched 4060 Ti has 42% more CUDA cores and higher memory speed. And the performance difference between models is never exactly linear with the paper specs, so we just need to benchmark it to see the scaling. It won't be necessarily actually 42%. The budget price bracket is starting to get a couple of new options though. So with the 4060, with the 7600, they're happening. It's just we're still missing that critical $200 to $250 price range that used to be incredibly popular. Intel's the only one there right now with the A750, and they're continuing to improve it, as you'll hear later in this news episode. NVIDIA hasn't publicly stated when the 4060 review embargo is, but it's traditionally the day before launch. After the last one and the keynote roundup, we'll see if we're on the list. Either way, we're going to be reviewing it, so keep an eye out for that as soon as we're able to push it. Neither company has talked about any type of 4050 or 7500 or whatever that might be lower price than this. So this is the newest, cheapest card other than the 7600 to talk about. And hopefully Intel's got some news for us soon, but it seems like it's mostly driver updates now, although that's not bad for them. Next one, AMD's CPUs getting massive amounts of cash with the Epyc lineup. So AMD just held its data center and AI technology event. This isn't something that we typically cover or go to, but we've got the news recap for you. And just as a note too, Wendell from Level 1 Techs was over there as I understand it, so he'll probably have something on the Level 1 Techs channel as well. AMD gave some details on the upcoming Instinct MI300 accelerator, and the biggest thing here was the launch of the new Zen 4C architecture for servers. It's codenamed Bergamo. AMD roadmapped this last year, and this is a density optimized design that increases the count of cores per CCD up to 16. The top spec, Epyc 9754, has 8 fully enabled 16-core dies for 192 Zen 4 cores in a single socket. Ian Kutcher posted a picture to Twitter showing the new CPU on the right alongside the already launched Genoa design with its 12 8-core dies on the left. The new Zen 4 C chips are best for workloads where density and absolute core count are the key. Additionally, AMD showed off its new Genoa X CPUs, which are Zen 4 with stacked 3D V-cache like the 78X3D. The main point to these is the massive total amount of that L3 cache, which goes up to 1152 megabytes on the Epyc 9684X CPU. That's over a full gigabyte of cache in a single socket. AMD says these are for what it calls technical computing. This, of course, implies the existence of non-technical computing, so these won't work with TikTok. Finally, AMD covered its Instinct MI300 family of accelerators. We covered these previously when they were first announced, so we'll just recap it here. These are basically massive APUs with CPU cores, GPU-style compute cores, and HBM, all in one incredibly complex package. AMD is launching 2 of these. The first being the MI300A, that has up to 128 gigabytes of HBM3, and it goes in the same socket as the Epyc CPUs. The second is the MI300X, which has up to 192 gigabytes of HBM3 for an insane 5.2 terabytes per second of memory bandwidth and a total 153 billion transistors. AMD ran a live demo of a single MI300X running a large language model with 40 billion parameters, something that would normally take multiple GPUs or accelerators to accomplish. They then asked it to write a poem. But just to remind everybody, nothing will ever beat the NVIDIA karaoke session that we saw in Taiwan.
I will make you like me first, yeah, sing it with me, I really.
This is the part.
Like NVIDIA.
All right, with that kind of performance, I'm gonna hire AI next time.
Sorry, AMD, until you get someone on stage who can make the crowd sing along and karaoke, it's just, NVIDIA is just too much. They're just too much for you. They're too much.
It was too much. Last night I said, this is too much. This morning I said, this is too much. And now I realize it's too much.
The servers will be able to be equipped with up to 8 of these AMD accelerators inside of the extremely heavy machine learning work.
Even this is incredibly heavy.
And for the memes, thanks, Jensen.
Thanks, Steve.
Up next, at Computex this year, there was a trend of PCs trying to hide cables, as you likely saw, with motherboards moving cabling to the backside and cases trying to accommodate it. But one of the things we didn't see there that was in line with this trend was the movement of GPU power connectors just physically on the board to be basically embedded within where a heatsink would typically be to try and hide or mask the routing. So this is as opposed to something like Asus's solution, where they did a separate foot on the PCIe, basically to the right of the PCIe slot, to deliver power. Inno3D was jumping on board with this. The first one they showed was the RTX 4070 AX Gaming with a white, orange, and blue colorway. The various images on the My Drivers forum post show how Inno3D has the standard 8-pin power connector mounted backwards, and that's on a thin strip of PCB that extends out from the main area of the board. There's a channel left in the cooler's fin stack to allow routing the cables towards the motherboard, and it's covered up by a removable portion of the backplate. It's hard to tell from the photos just how much room there's left for running the cable under the card and across the board, but it might be better with a more generous cutout. This is just a concept though, so they're likely still revising the design. The backplate wraps around the edge of the board and it unfortunately blocks off the fin stack's exhaust area, so that's probably worthy of a change. And there are small cuts present, but it's far more blocked than open. The other Inno3D card is the 4060 Ti Pink. It uses the same reverse-mounted power connector, but leaves behind the removable backplate. With this one, the idea is that your power cable comes through in a big hole on top of the backplate, leaving it visible but minimized. This seems easier to cable manage and the cooler isn't blocked off at all, so that's an upside. Now, Jeremy wrote in the script for that particular section in news, "We like this one best," and all I can think about now is NVIDIA's song of indoctrination.
I will make you like me first, yeah.
So let's move on as quickly as possible before it just rains around in my head for the next 3 weeks, like it's already done. Also, sorry to Mike editing this. Now it's gonna get you too. Next is from Gigabyte. This is a 4090 WindForce V2. The WindForce V2 has a big rectangle chopped out of the front corner to allow access to a 12-volt high power cable mounted on the end of the PCB. This leaves the cable visible unless vertically mounted, and it should help in situations where the side panel of a case would be too close to the power connector when shut. The most obvious downside to this approach is the loss of cooling surface area. The missing section looks like roughly 10% of the overall cooler. We'd have to test it though to be sure how much of an impact that might have. It's still too early to tell if the cableless appearance trend is here to stay, but manufacturers are collectively showing more than a token effort here. It might have limited functional impact, but overall, some change or innovation and lateral thinking being applied here isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is a quick one, but another small update on Microsoft trying to buy Activision Blizzard. The Northern District Court of California has filed a temporary restraining order against the two companies on behalf of the Federal Trade Commission. Yes, companies apparently can have restraining orders filed against them. This formally prevents the companies from closing the deal until after the court holds a hearing on June 22nd and 23rd to rule on the FTC's preliminary injunction. That's really all the update for that one right now, so we'll update you if anything interesting happens. Up next, the Zephyr 3060 Ti. This card has a pink PCB, so we're going further down the rabbit hole of not just waifu cards, but just generally glam cards. Is that like a new, maybe it's like glam metal, except now it's like a genre of video card. We're gonna make it a thing. The Zephyr 3060 Ti has a pink PCB and white cooler shroud, and the company calls it Sakura and Snow. We've seen pink coolers before, and we've seen Sakura cards before, like on the Yeston models we've reviewed, but never pink on the actual PCB. This truly is an innovation, but sometimes we wonder, have they gone too far? Is it, in fact, too much?
And now I realize it's too much.
The description on the Billy video says that Zephyr tried a lot of different solutions to get the color to match between the PCB and the fan. We've heard of similar struggles when manufacturers are trying to match white across materials as well, so the effort tracks. The card has a small single fan cooler with a horizontal fin stack, 4 heat pipes, and a copper base plate to manage the heat of the GA104 die. Curiously, the shroud doesn't seem to have the usual GeForce RTX anywhere on it. NVIDIA cards sourced some additional images of the card, including of the bare PCB. Aside from the color, it's pretty standard and simple. The backplate has a Sakura flower motif cut into it as well. The video of the company's assembly line was also interesting. It shows the process of taking a bare PCB, adding the solder paste, placing all the components, and soldering them on. You also get a look at how the NVIDIA BGA packages come vacuum sealed in trays. This was honestly only interesting adding to the story just because it's kind of cool to see. This is another short entry for the news this week. There's a rumor going around right now of AMD preparing, allegedly, to launch a 5600X 3D for the AM4 platform. So this originated when Twitter user Golden Mango posted this heavily cropped image of an Excel spreadsheet comparing the 5800X3D to a new CPU. Now, the specs listed show the 5600X3D as having 6 cores and 12 threads, the same 96 megabytes of L3 cache, and a 4.4 gigahertz max boost. Obviously, it's kind of hard to believe that AMD would want to launch a new product on a previous generation platform, but there are some indications as to what this might mean. Now, first up, the reasons AMD might not do this would be, number one, cannibalizing its own existing parts, especially in the newer 7000 series, where suddenly they'll undermine their own efforts and start selling out from under themselves, hurting sales of the newer and probably more expensive product. That's number one reason. Second reason is that it's older, but on the opposite side of this, some of the reasons AMD might want to make such a chip would be if it's sitting on old inventory and it needs to purge it, or just generally find something to do with the old 5000 series silicon. Could also be the case that AMD has enough partially defective Zen 3 CCDs with stacked cache on board, and they want to do something with them. If there's no way to sell those into the server market, maybe the consumer space would go for it. If we indulge in a tiny amount of speculation on this, logically it would have to be cheaper than the 5800X3D, or it wouldn't make sense, and that recently has been on sale below $300. That would put it in, who knows, the 200s or something. And it's hard to say how it would stack up against other Zen 3 and 4 options. For this one for now, we'd say don't get too excited. There were so many stories on this that it almost seems like it's being willed into existence, or that it is happening. We don't really follow the rumors in any close capacity most of the time, so we have just as much information as you all do, unless we start reaching out to confirm certain things, and we don't do that for every story because sometimes they can't confirm it. So anyway, don't get too excited about it. There's a lot of groundswell on stories. Maybe it's a thing that's happening, but either way, obviously we'll keep an eye on it. It's just, seems like there's a lot of reasons they would not do a 5600X3D that are all business reasons, but maybe there's just enough of that old inventory, and that's more desirable to sell through than to, say, avoid harming the 7000 series. Now we get to probably the most important and impactful launch for the news this week. That's Arctic's desk fan. It's called Summair, like S-U-M-M air.
Whoosh. I am the sound effect.
These human coolers are desk fans, and the Summair Plus is a battery-operated desk fan with an impeller that resembles the P12 Max. The maximum RPM is 3,300, and that's also the same as the P12 Max, so they might actually share the same motors. The Summair Plus has a rechargeable battery in the base that Arctic claims can drive the fan for about 14 hours at 1,500 RPM, or 2 hours at max speed. This is controlled via a simple knob, and it's available in white or black and costs $33. There's also a version without the battery that's powered via USB only for $27. While writing the story, we were reminded of the funky-looking knock to a desk fan prototype at Computex 2019. It still hasn't come out, and we're not sure if they're going to bother with it, but certainly fan companies have shown this type of product before. Up next, Steam pushes a large update. Valve emailed us actually in the past week to notify us of some of the changes they're making to the Steam client interface. Valve posted this video detailing an overhaul of the Steam main navigational pages and an updated UI, like for the screenshot manager. It also focused on an updated overlay that enables a new note-taking feature, so you can avoid alt-tabbing to write down quest details or other things you're focused on in the game. This seems like it'd be most useful in maybe an MMO. The notes are saved to cloud storage, so they're accessible anywhere you use the same account. Valve also pointed out that notifications have been revamped to be more useful, and additionally, Valve has added pinned windows so that you can keep certain UI elements visible while still keeping the game the active in-focus window to play. This is, again, particularly useful for the new notes feature and the guides feature. Valve had several other controller, Steam Deck, and UI updates that we won't get into here, but more notably for our audience, it also highlighted hardware acceleration now being enabled on Mac and Linux versions of Steam. The company notes that this will make the user interface much more responsive to navigate on the other two OSs. Up next, Intel. Intel emailed us to notify us of a major driver update once again for its Arc GPUs. This doesn't impact everything. It's more targeted at just a few specific games that we're going to go over. And this is following in its steady cadence of updating drivers since the launch, which it desperately needed because the hardware, as we said in the review, was pretty compelling. It's just it didn't have the stability or the driver support, and it's getting there. So we did a revisit, if you missed it several months ago at this point, a couple months ago, for the large update at the time, might have been 4091 or something like that. And we showed all the new performance, talked about some of the other changes to our control. And then more recently, we didn't make a big deal out of this, but a lot of you asked for a revisit again. And we actually did that. We just didn't do it in its own piece. So all of our data from the RX 7600 review with ARC, all of that's brand new. So it is a revisit. We just didn't make a standalone branded video that way. So if you want to see where it is now, go check out the 7600 review, look through the charts. That's all new data, so it's pretty refreshed. It's not using these drivers though. Intel has noted uplift ranging from 18 to 33% in F1 2023, 8 to 10% in Counter-Strike 2, 11% in Destiny 2, and improvements for Aliens Dark Descent and Forever Skies. All of this is in driver version 4499, with the uplift calculated against version 4382. Intel has a number of known issues listed for ARC control and ARC graphics in general, and those are on the page. The fact that they're known suggests that Intel is hopefully working on these. And finally, the Bethesda page for Starfield has gotten an update on the minimum requirements for the system and recommended configurations for computers that'll be playing the upcoming open world single player space RPG. The page indicates that Windows 10 is the required OS, really not surprising because DX12 is the API, and the CPU should be at least an R5 2600X or an Intel i7-6800K. The Intel CPU is kind of a weird choice, but these types of pages always have weird choices on them. The 6800K wasn't a mainstream product. It was actually a Broadwell eCPU with a 2011 socket, as in the LGA 2011. Regardless, if we're trying to interpret it, it looks like they're looking for 6 cores. The memory is required to be at least 16 gigabytes, with recommended the same. The GPU requirements are an RX 5700 or a 1070 Ti, and the 6800 XT and 2080 are recommended. Finally, for storage space, Starfield notes that an SSD is explicitly required, likely for loading reasons, and that 125 gigabytes is the necessary capacity. And if any of the trailer footage we showed interests you, it's supposed to launch on September 6th for this year. We'll probably be looking at that one explicitly once it comes out. So that's it for the news this week. Thanks for watching as always. Subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly, and we'll see you all next time.